Now this is a juvenile polyp as well, but unlike the other example I have up on YouTube, which was sporadic in nature, this juvenile polyp is from a patient with juvenile polyposis syndrome. So it's a syndromic juvenile polyp. And you'll notice it looks somewhat different. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at this for a second and see what is unique about this polyp. Unlike sporadic juvenile polyps that have marked variation in crypt size with cystification of cysts creating that Swiss cheese-like appearance, many of these syndromic juvenile polyps will not show that classic Swiss cheese appearance. The other thing that these syndromic juvenile polyps lack is that expansion of the lamina propria. So let's look at this under higher power. So here's that polyp under higher power, and you'll notice there is expansion of the lamina propria, although it is less than what you see with a sporadic juvenile polyp. There is some variation in crypt size, although it is again less than you typically see with a sporadic juvenile polyp. There are areas where there is extravasated mucin and ruptured crypts. And the lining epithelium is composed of colonic lining epithelium with the appropriate number of goblet cells. So when I look at these polyps from patients with juvenile polyposis syndrome, to my eye they often look like muted juvenile polyps. Nevertheless, they continue to have that dilatation of the colonic crypts and that expansion of the lamina propria. Now here's another polyp. This is also from a patient with juvenile polyposis syndrome. The patient had multiple polyps resected over many years. And what you'll notice on low bar is, unlike a sporadic juvenile polyp, this doesn't really hit you on the head as a juvenile polyp, does it? Nevertheless, take a look here. You will notice some expansion of the lamina propria, but there are a lot of glands all back to back. In general, this looks more blue than you would typically see with a juvenile polyp. So there's something more. Right here, this looks very much like a juvenile polyp, right? It's that expansion of the lamina propria, those hugely dilated crypts, marked variation in crypt size. And if you look at the epithelium down here, I'm not particularly concerned. Perhaps some of the nuclei do look a little more revved up, but remember, this is the base. This is not the surface, so I'm not going to give it as much importance. But now I'm on the surface, and I'll prove it to you. So those crypts, that crypt epithelium I'm showing you is right on the surface here. And if I go on higher power, I am now truly concerned. Not only is it on the surface, but the nuclei are tall, dark, and hyperchromatic. They are also stratified. That looks awfully adenomatous. And so does that crypt. Now when I see atypical epithelium on the top, the first question I ask myself is there an erosion or ulceration adjacent to this very atypical epithelium? And to answer that question, I need to back out and look under low power, and I simply do not see it. I do not see erosion, I do not see ulceration, and more importantly, I do not see a reaction in terms of granulation tissue to a potential erosion or ulceration. And given the absence of an erosion or an ulceration, given the absence of inflammation, I am very concerned that this is indeed low-grade dysplasia, but one swallow does not make a summer. So this is another focus that caught my eye. It again does look like a juvenile polyp. There's expansion of the lamina propria, large, irregularly dilated glands. Interestingly enough, the base of the polyp, or whatever I can best see as the base, doesn't look too bad. But as I cross to the surface, I am getting very concerned about this epithelium. Out of context, I could call this a tubular adenoma, and to me, that's a very telling statement. If I look at an image and I say, I'm happy to call this a tubular adenoma, that to me argues very strongly that I'm dealing with dysplasia. Now, if this is dysplasia, what grade of dysplasia is this? Grading, as you well know, is somewhat challenging, but if you look at these nuclei, the majority of these nuclei are on the basal half. There is an apical cytoplasmic compartment. The nuclei are polarized. By that I mean the nuclei are perpendicular to the basement membrane. Based on those features and the lack of crowding of the crypts, I call this low-grade dysplasia. Patients with juvenile polyposis syndrome, which is what this patient had, are at increased risk for colorectal carcinoma, and patients with low-grade dysplasia and high-grade dysplasia are at an even higher risk for progressing to invasive colonic adenocarcinoma. So, juvenile polyposis colon with low-grade dysplasia.